lead hurricane season forecaster, and FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. We'll begin today's briefing with remarks from our speakers, and then we'll take questions from reporters. If you'd like to ask a question during the question and answer portion of this briefing, please click the hand icon in the GoToWebinar window next to your name. I'll then call upon each reporter that has virtually raised their hand, and your line will be unmuted. You may use the questions tool also in the GoToWebinar window to type a question for our speakers about today's hurricane outlook. Please be sure to state or type your full name and media affiliation when asking your question. With that, I would like to welcome Mr. Ben Friedman to open our briefing.
All right, thank you, Lauren, and good morning to you and everyone here on the call. Thank you for being here today. I have the pleasure of introducing the Deputy Secretary of Commerce, Don Graves, to share opening remarks as we begin today's briefing. Although Mr. Graves is only in his first full week in his new role, I can tell you that I've already had the opportunity to meet with him and brief him on NOAA's hurricane efforts. He's a self-described weather aficionado who is enthusiastic about working with NOAA in his new role, and we're very excited to have him at the helm. So thank you, Deputy Secretary Graves, for being here today, and I now turn the briefing over to you.
Well, hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you. Thank you, Ben, for that introduction and your continued leadership at NOAA. Nearly all of us have witnessed the impact that weather can have on our communities. Some of us view weather events as a mere nuisance, extra rain that slows traffic or snow that forces us to adjust plans for the day. But I've seen firsthand that the devastating impact that extreme weather can have on American lives and livelihoods. After Hurricane Katrina, I traveled to Louisiana to assist small businesses that had been impacted by the storm on their long road to recovery. What I experienced there made me realize how important it is to stay informed about the changing environment around us. People associate 2020 with the year we experienced the worst global pandemic in over a century. But last year was also the most active Atlantic hurricane season in 170 years. It involved 30 named storms, including 7 that each cost more than $1 billion in damages. And they were among the 22 record-setting weather and climate events in 2020 that together cost the U.S. over $96 billion. From high winds to heavy rains, hurricanes can have a devastating impact on the safety of our families and the health of our economies. It's imperative that we take steps to prepare ourselves ahead of the upcoming hurricane season. And that's where NOAA comes in. Their timely forecasts before storms help guide decisions around protecting life and property. And their survey work after a storm helps businesses return safely through our ports. As Deputy Secretary of Commerce, I am so proud of the vital work the NOAA team performs every day. I have the utmost confidence in the expertise of our scientists and in the integrity of their forecast because they're grounded in facts and data. Their world-class research, cutting-edge technology, and standard of excellence are second to none. They help ensure that America is ready, responsive, and resilient to natural disasters. Today, NOAA will issue its initial prediction for the number of tropical storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes for the upcoming season. I encourage everyone to take their guidance seriously and prepare accordingly. Thank you all for joining us today, and I'll turn it back to Ben.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Graves. And again, we really appreciate you joining us today. As the Deputy Secretary noted, it was a mere 6 months ago that the most active Atlantic hurricane season on record ended. And here we are now on the cusp of a new hurricane season. Later in this briefing, FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell will discuss the importance of early preparations for hurricanes in greater detail, but I do want to take a moment to emphasize that if you're in a hurricane zone, now is the time to ensure that you have an evacuation plan in place, disaster supplies on hand, and a plan to secure your home quickly. It's also important to note that hurricanes bring not only dangerous winds as they come ashore, but also deadly storm surge and inland flooding. So make sure your planning focuses on the impact of water as well as wind. I also want to emphasize that since last year's hurricane season, NOAA has continually improved the observations, modeling, and hurricane research that are the backbone of our forecasting. We are fully dedicated to providing the best scientifically backed data and information to the public, the emergency management community, and the entire country for the hurricane season and all year long. And now, on to this year's Atlantic hurricane season outlook. NOAA's outlook for the 2021 Atlanta hurricane season indicates that an above normal season is most likely. Specifically, there is a 60% chance of an above normal season, a 30% chance of a near normal season, and a 10% chance of a below normal season. For the range of storms that we expect, the outlook calls for a 70% probability in the following ranges: 13 to 20 named storms with top winds of at least 39 miles per hour. Of these 13 to 20 named storms, 6 to 10 will become hurricanes with top winds of at least 74 miles per hour. This includes 3 to 5 major hurricanes ranked as categories 3, 4, or 5 with top winds of at least 111 miles per hour. With that, let me take a moment to tell you about several of the enhancements that NOAA has made to its products and services over the last year to ensure we are providing the best forecasts possible to the country. First, in March, we upgraded our flagship global forecast system, known as the American model, to improve hurricane forecasting. And for the first time, it is coupled with a wave model that extends ocean wave forecasts from 10 days to 16 days out. Next, forecasters at the National Hurricane Center are now using an upgraded storm surge model known as P-Surge to better predict tropical cyclone wind structure and storm size, some of the most important factors in predicting storm surge flooding. Also, this year NOAA's Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory will deploy the largest array of air and water uncrewed systems to date to gather data designed to help improve hurricane intensity forecasts and forecast models, including new drones that scientists will launch from NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft that fly into the lower part of hurricanes to capture critical data, and a variety of uncrewed ocean observing platforms, including sail drones, hurricane gliders, global drifters, and new air deployable technology called Alamo floats to gather data throughout the life cycle of tropical systems. Finally, this summer, NOAA's newest supercomputers will enter their final testing phase before becoming operational in early 2022. This significant upgrade will triple the capacity and double the storage of our current systems, unlocking possibilities for better hurricane forecast model guidance in the future. Before I close, I want to take a moment to give special thanks to the skilled forecasters at the National Hurricane Center in Miami who kept up with the record season last year and will produce the timely and accurate forecasts we all rely on throughout the 2021 season. And of course, across the National Weather Service, our forecasters maintain watch around the clock, year-round, to provide the country with the critical forecast watches and warnings that we need. I will now turn the briefing over to Matthew Rosenkrantz, NOAA's new lead for the seasonal hurricane outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. As we look forward to the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season, there are several factors that we took into consideration when developing the May outlook. Last year's busy season was a clear reflection of the ongoing high activity era, which began in 1995 and continues to be a factor in our outlook for 2021. Typically, high activity era conditions include warmer than average sea surface temperatures, weaker trade winds in the Atlantic hurricane main development region, as well as weaker vertical wind shear and an enhanced West African monsoon. The El Nino Southern Oscillation, otherwise known as ENSO, is another significant influence on the hurricane season. We are currently experiencing ENSO neutral conditions, which do not largely inhibit hurricane formation or suppress the features of the ongoing high activity era. Should La Nina return later in the hurricane season, which does have the potential to occur, it could reinforce those high activity era conditions and increase the likelihood that we could see seasonal activity near the upper ends of our predicted ranges. Based on our current data and analysis, We do not expect the 2021 hurricane season to be as active as 2020. However, we do update our Atlantic seasonal outlook in August, as we do each year before we move into the peak of the hurricane season during August, September, and October. Additionally, last month, we updated the seasonal averages for hurricane season based on the latest information from 1991 through 2020. Moving forward, an average Atlantic hurricane season will have 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes, reflecting data from the latest portion of the high activity era. The previous averages included 12 named storms and 6 hurricanes. The number of major hurricanes remained the same at 3. For the Eastern and Central Pacific basins, the averages did not change. The Eastern Pacific averages remain at 15 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. The Central Pacific Basin maintains an average of 4 named storms, 3 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes. Regardless of the predicted seasonal activity, it's important to remember it takes only one dangerous storm to devastate a community and lives. I would encourage everyone to visit the National Hurricane Center's website at hurricanes.gov throughout the season to stay on top of watches and warnings as they develop. With that, I would like to welcome our next speaker, FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell.
Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for including FEMA in today's Outlook. After last year's record-setting hurricane season in the middle of a global pandemic, I assure you we are more prepared than ever for the threats that may come along this year. Due to the adoption of more virtual operations and inspections and no-contact service methods, our response has evolved to ensure that we keep the safety of individuals we serve at the forefront of our minds throughout their times of greatest need. We are also increasing public communications by using social media platforms, virtual town halls, and coordinated messaging to survivors from FEMA officials and local community leaders. We are ensuring all communications from FEMA are accessible, and individuals with disabilities and limited English proficiency during response and recovery efforts. But preparation is key. For many, unfortunately, preparing for hurricane season has become an annual ritual because you have experienced the impact of these storms so many times before. There are 2 big ideas to keep in mind as you plan to ensure the safety of your family and your personal property. First, preparing yourself and your family can often prevent serious injury or even mean the difference between life and death. Preparing your home for hurricanes can mean the difference between minor damage or complete destruction. Here are some initial steps that you can take to prepare for any of these storm systems that could affect you or your community. First, we encourage everyone to visit ready.gov/hurricanes to discover preparedness information that includes tips and planning tools for individuals and businesses. You should also download the FEMA app from the Apple and Google Play stores to receive weather alerts and warnings for up to 5 different locations in the US. Next, make an emergency plan. Make sure everyone in your household knows and understands your hurricane plan. Don't forget to plan for the office, for your kids' daycare, and for anywhere that you spend a lot of time. Review your important documents. Make sure your insurance policies and your personal documents like your ID are up to date. Make sure you make copies or digital copies and keep them in a secure, password-protected digital space. Know your hurricane risk. Hurricanes are not just a coastal problem. Find out how rain, wind, water could happen where you live so you can prepare better now. Be sure to consider also how the COVID-19 environment may affect those plans. And finally, know your evacuation zone. You may have to evacuate quickly during a hurricane. Learn your evacuation routes, practice with your household, your pets, and identify where you're going to stay. I mentioned insurance earlier, and I want to emphasize that there's no more important or valuable disaster recovery tool than having insurance. Talk with your insurance agent to fully understand your insurance policies and know what kinds of coverage that you have. Everyone can take steps now to make sure that they're prepared for this season, or any other disaster for that matter. Visit ready.gov to learn about how to prepare for disasters that might happen where you live, where you work, or where you spend your time most. And FEMA is also ready. Community readiness requires the support of stakeholders across the public and private sector. It is impossible to do the work of FEMA. It's impossible to do the work that FEMA does without the help of federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial partners. Being able to partner with this diverse spectrum of resources helps us do our jobs better and makes our response more effective to meet the needs of the communities that we serve. Earlier this week, we released our COVID-19 pandemic operational guidance to support our state, local, tribal, and territorial governmental partners in their planning for disaster response and recovery, while also adhering to the updated public health guidelines to help prevent the further spread of COVID-19. You can read this document and you can sign up for a webinar online at FEMA.gov. The document updates the guidance that was released during the 2020 hurricane season and highlights some of the best practices and lessons learned from operating in the COVID-19 environment. Much of FEMA's workforce is also getting vaccinated to protect themselves and others while they serve. We will also continue to observe and follow CDC guidelines to protect the health and safety of those we serve in times of disaster without reducing the effectiveness of the assistance we provide. We will continue to balance and continually adjust the number of in-person deployments to disasters, and will use virtual deployments, especially for smaller or less complex disasters. In closing, I just wanted to say that our preparedness message remains the same. The best way to help your community recover from a disaster is by you taking steps now to prepare yourself and your family. We urge everyone living in a hurricane-prone area to plan now for the possibility of severe weather conditions. This notice also extends inland, for as these powerful storms do not just affect the coast, heavy rains and flooding can happen far inland from these storms. And as an emergency manager, I have always focused on keeping families and communities safe. There is nothing more rewarding than being able to serve and help the people of this country. As the leader of this agency, I can tell you that the team at FEMA is ready to assist before, during, and after disasters. With that, I will turn it back to Laura Gacious from NOAA.
Thank you very much. We'll now take specific questions from reporters and our media partners that have joined us in the webinar. I'd like to just remind everyone of the instructions for asking a question that were given at the top of the call. If you'd like to ask a question, please click the hand icon in the GoToWebinar window next to your name. I'll then call upon each reporter that has a virtually raised hand, and once you're called upon, your line will be unmuted. You may also use the questions tool in the GoToWebinar window to type a question for our speakers about today's hurricane outlook. Please be sure to state or type your full name and media affiliation when asking your question. I would ask for your patience now while we're moderating your questions, as it may take a moment to bring those in line and to organize them. So please stand by. Our first question comes from Seth Borenstein. Seth, your line should now be open.
Thank you for doing this. My question is for Matthew. It's actually a two-parter here. In terms of the forecast, you talk about sea surface temperatures, of course, in the Atlantic. Can you tell us, if any, how much of a factor, if anything, human-caused climate change would be here between the sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic? And also, there's been this long-running debate in the hurricane and the climate change community about what Bill Gray used to call these periods of high activity that you referred to. There's been some recent studies that show that maybe there are no more, that the AMO really doesn't exist, and that there isn't a period, a natural variability between high and low activity. So I'm wondering, the climate change factor here, and do you think there are still these periods that go, and when would we get back to one of the lower periods, aren't we due? Thank you.
So climate change has been directly linked to, in modern times, to increase sea surface temperatures, which can then increase the amount of storms that actually reach Category 4 and 5 storms, Category 4 and 5, so reaching that upper echelon of storm strength and intensity. It has also been linked to heavier precipitation in the from each storm, and in some basins in the world, it's been linked to a northward shift in the place where the storms generally recurve or kind of turn from moving westward to moving eastward. So the increased rainfall is about 3%. That's what's been predicted up through the current time. There is some research that says that can increase 10% in the next 100 years, but we won't have seen that for this year. The surface temperatures in the Atlantic are predicted to be about 0.38 degrees above normal. Last year, they were 0.56 degrees above normal. For the AMO and the activity periods, the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, the data shows clear oscillations all the way back into the 1800s. Some of the recent research has come out about what causes the AMO to change, and that's kind of a different question from the impact of AMO into the tropical cyclone season.
Yes, just one quick question. When you talk about 0.38 and 0.56, are we talking degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit?
That's degrees Celsius.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Seth. Our next question comes from Joan Gralla with Newsday, and she asks, was there a decision about changing the start date of the hurricane season? And also, what is the latest outlook for the New York or Long Island area?
So I can take that. We've often had named storms form before the start of the official season. That's very typical during high activity era to get one named storm that usually forms before the season. We've had about half of the last 10 to 15 years have had a storm form. There is no plans to change the 2021 hurricane season, but it's my understanding that there are discussions, both internal to NOAA and within the WMO, about changing that and potential ramifications. All of that will be guided by the physical science and the social science. As far as the New York City area and landfalls or anything like that, landfall forecast and direct impacts to the New York area are best made within about a week before landfall. So take the time to prepare now. If you're in a coastal location, understand that storm surge and heavy and high winds are probably likely your primary threat. If you're further inland, freshwater flooding from just the pure amount of rain and high winds is more likely a threat there. So understand your threat and understand where you can work, and then visit ready.gov for help and planning to mitigate those threats.
Thanks, Matt. I think the next one will be for you as well. This one comes from Kim Miller with the Palm Beach Post. Her question is, with a neutral ENSO phase, what other specific factors will play roles in creating or strengthening storms?
So with an ENSO neutral phase, ENSO neutral does not kind of inhibit the high activity era conditions from shining through. Those high activity era conditions are warmer than normal sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic, weaker than normal vertical wind shear, which is the difference between winds at about 35,000 feet and about 5,000 feet, weaker than normal trade winds across the tropical Atlantic, and a stronger than average West African monsoon, which is where most of the major hurricanes form. They come from waves that move off the coast of Africa.
Thanks, Matt. This next question will be for FEMA. The question comes from Julia Musso with Fox News, and the question is, how are NOAA and FEMA and other government agencies coordinating with officials in coastal locations still recovering from last hurricane season that were hit hard by flooding during the year, like the Gulf Coast states, for example, and what are they doing to help them prepare for 2021?
Hi, thank you. This is Deanne Criswell with FEMA. Great question. NOAA and the National Hurricane Center has been a great partner with FEMA for for the longest period of time, right? And so we work together collectively to make sure that we are getting consistent messaging out to state and local jurisdictions. But a big piece of that as well from the FEMA point of view is that we work very closely with our state partners and our local partners as they are doing their preparedness efforts, getting ready for this hurricane season. And then when we do see a storm that has the potential for landfall or impact, the National Hurricane Center, along with FEMA, work collectively to make sure that we are getting the right messaging out so people can prepare appropriately and take action as early as we need them to.
Great, thank you so much. The next question comes from Laura Martinez. Laura, your line should now be unmuted. You just need to unmute yourself.
Okay, hi, I'm Laura Martinez. I'm with the Brownsville Herald. And I live here in Brownsville, Texas, South Texas. I wonder, what are the chances of South Texas being affected by another hurricane this year? I know we had Hurricane Hannah last year that she hit between Corpus Christi and the Brownsville area. So what should we be expecting in the South Texas area?
Matt, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, specifically the South Texas area for landfalls, those forecasts are best made about a week out. We do know that during high activity eras, we are more likely to have landfalling hurricanes. There's about a 30% chance, increased chance of that anywhere along the coast though, but specifically for the South Texas coast, landfall forecasts are definitely made about a week out. So people should take the time to prepare now. And get their supplies as if a storm could come to them at any point during this hurricane season.
Great, thank you. Next question comes from Mindy Weisberger with Live Science for Matt. Do the new adjusted average number of Atlantic season storms reflect long-term sea surface temperature shifts due to climate change?
Climate change does not have a direct impact on the number of named storms. That's what the latest research has come out with. Most of the increase in storms is really a reflection of the better technology to detect the storms, such as better satellites called scaperometers. That allow us to really understand better storm structure and declare them as tropical storms rather than something that may not be tropical storm strength. So that's one of the major impacts is the better observing technology. Also the continued reconnaissance from the hurricane hunters. It's so valuable in determining the actual strength of an investigation area.
Thank you so much. Let's see here, going to the phones. Our next question comes from Eben Brown. Eben, your line should now be open once you remove your self-mute.
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Great, thanks. Eben Brown, Fox News. I think this question is perhaps best directed to the folks at FEMA. How is the condition of infrastructure heading into this this hurricane season? We have had issues in the past, and I'm thinking predominantly with the New Orleans area regarding levees and the type of flooding that New Orleans is prone to because of its elevation below sea level. But we have practically up and down the East Coast, there are areas of weakened infrastructure that could become imperiled with the right or the wrong strike of a tropical cyclone, whether it's city water systems or electrical grids and the like. Could FEMA talk about that, about our readiness in that regard?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. You know, one of the concerns we have all the time is the fragility of our infrastructure, and we've seen that in certain parts of the country. It's certainly more fragile than others. And we've had recent storms that have impacted that. I think where FEMA's role really comes to play is that as these communities are on recovering from previous disasters, we really work with them to rebuild and build back better. We have assistance through our public assistance program that can help improve the resiliency of the infrastructure so it is better protected for future events. The other way that FEMA can assist with this as well is through pre-disaster mitigation dollars, right? And making sure that we can do the system-wide mitigation based on future threats and knowing what the potential vulnerabilities are. But those vulnerabilities really have to be determined by the state and local level. And so we really work with them to better understand their needs and use these types of grant programs so they can request assistance based on the needs that they have identified.
Thank you. Our next question, I'm going to go to Deanne White. Your line should now be open. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, we should be able to hear you. All right, not hearing from her here. It looks like she also included a question in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read that question. She is the editor of the Florida Patch Online news site, and the question is for Matt. How will new modeling and addition of new satellite technology and drones change the way NOAA tracks hurricanes and how we receive and report on hurricanes?
So there's kind of two parts to that question. The increased observations, as Mr. Friedman mentioned before, all the latest technology in the unmanned systems that are being deployed by NOAA, they give us a much better indication of the condition or the state of the hurricane, the atmosphere, the ocean at any given point in time. That information is then fed into our numerical prediction models, which are constantly being evaluated and upgraded. And there's a new GFS 16.1.1 going in this year. So that'll make the best use of some of the latest observation and technology. So it's really about what's the best condition of the atmosphere right now, and that's the best starting point to make the most accurate forecast for the landfall for the next week or so.
Thanks, Matt. Looks like our next question will be for FEMA. Comes from Sean Cobb. The question is, will FEMA be prepared to help with extended shelters in areas like the U.S. Virgin Islands that are still recovering from Category 5 storms 2017 and have few shelter facilities available, especially in light of COVID-19?
Thanks for that question. Again, as I mentioned in my comments, we just released the new guidance for this year to help state and local jurisdictions prepare for the 2021 hurricane season. And one of the principles that we used based in 2020 was the ability to use non-congregate and congregate sheltering as options. So state and local jurisdictions can put together plans and prepare for what's going to work best for those communities. That worked well in 2020. We're going to move that forward into 2021. And our regional administrators are working really closely with their states to understand where their needs are and how they plan to facilitate the sheltering needs that may be needed when it's whether it's evacuating people from the threat zone or after a disaster hits and makes impact and we have to do extended sheltering. So we do have some increased options going into this year based on the lessons learned from last year, and we'll work closely with our states to help meet their needs and what's going to work best for them.
Great, thank you. For our next question, we're going to go to Darvin Nelson. Darvin, your line should now be open. Darvin, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, this is Darvin Nelson from UNF Spinnaker News. I have a question for anyone really. Is there any data that is specific for different regions of the nation? For example, what can states like Florida expect from the hurricane season this summer?
Matt?
Sure. Typically during high activity eras and above normal seasons, we do see more storms that get closer to the US and have more landfalls. But specifically making forecasts for any individual state or any point along the coastline for landfalls, that's best done about a week out. And the forecasters at the National Hurricane Center and their local weather forecast officer on top of that. So take the time to prepare now, because those things are uncertain out into the future where exactly a storm will go. So understand your risk and follow all the guidance from FEMA. They really have some great resources.
Thanks, Matt. Looking here again at our questions. Gosh, there are a lot, so please be patient with me while I try to sort through them here. Question for Matt from Carlo Falco. How does the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation and ENSO neutral conditions affect the placement of semi-permanent highs, such as Bermuda High, and other steering flow large-scale features?
So the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, depending on exactly which phase it's in, can actually change the area of the high pressure over the western U.S., or excuse me, over the western Atlantic. During the warmer phase, it can typically pull it to the north a little bit, and it will typically be a little bit weaker. That's why you get the reduced trade winds. That's during a positive phase of the AMO during the high activity era. The impacts from La Nina or El Nino, if it changes, that does cause some waves that move across the planet. Those can change on a seasonal basis, so they can kind of change throughout the season. Typically, a La Nina would result in a high pressure a little bit further to the north and west, centered over the southeast U.S. So that's why, again, that's a little bit further to the north and west again. So they would be reinforcing if there's a La Nina coming in. So there's lots of interplay in that, and then the strength of that high pressure system will wax and wane throughout the season. So that's kind of what creates those steering currents that then again feeds back into landfall forecasts, which are best made again within that week about or so time frame.
Thanks, Matt. The next question's for you as well from Annie Baxter. She says, I think you hit on this somewhat, but could you provide a frame for what we're seeing regarding trends related to climate change the past few decades, more intense, more frequent storms, and how this forecast does or doesn't match those trends?
Sure. So climate change has not been directly linked to the frequency of named storms, tropical storms, but it has been linked to an increase in intensity of storms. So once they do form, they have a possibility to get to those category 4 and 5 storms to get that intensity level up. Climate change is also linked to heavier precipitation within storms, about 3%. That's about the estimate for that we've experienced through at the current time. Also, sea level rise can make coastal areas much more prone to the flooding, and that's taken into account with our great work on the probabilistic storm surge. So this forecast is mainly reflecting of the ongoing high activity era and the potential for the ENSO neutral to not cap that high activity era, those conditions.
Thanks so much, Matt. Going to the phone here to Mikkel Hannah Harding. Your line should now be open.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, my name is Mikkel Hannah Harding, and I'm a broadcast meteorologist at WRDW News in Augusta, Georgia. My question is for NOAA, so it'll be for Matt, I believe. And it's just, I feel like last year I noticed that there were a few tropical systems we had that kind of maintained their strength for a decent amount of time once they moved inland. Have you guys done any kind of like studies or noticed anything about storms being able to maintain their strength further inland for this upcoming hurricane season?
That's not an area of research that's for my expertise. Lauren, there's probably someone at GFDL or another part of NOAA that has looked into it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mikkel, why don't you follow up with me at the end of today's briefing, and we'll definitely see if we can get you in touch with the best expert for that particular question.
Okay, what's the best way to get in contact with you? Is it Lauren I'm talking to?
Yes, it's Lauren. Hi there. My contact
Hello.
information is on the media advisory you used to register for today's event, and I'll repeat it again at the end of the briefing.
Awesome, that sounds good. Thank you, guys.
You're so welcome. Our next question comes from, let's see here, Chris Martinez with WPBF in South Florida. Are there any new models or developments that could help in forecasting rapid intensification? Matt, it's probably for you.
So NOAA did just recently upgrade its high-res models, which are the high-res over the US. But as far as any forecast or model upgrade to HMORPH or HMON, we'd really have to refer you back to Lauren and she can get you the modeling expert.
Sure, I'm happy to help with that as well. We can connect with someone from our Environmental Modeling Center to help address that question. A question here for FEMA from Abby Bennett. What are the ongoing concerns related to the pandemic and storm response and recovery?
You know, I think that the biggest concern that I have is that our state and local jurisdictions have been managing the response to COVID-19 for well over a year now, and their staff are tired, right? And so I think, you know, one of our goals right now is to make sure that our staff here at FEMA are rested and reset and ready for hurricane season, and we are. And working again closely with our state partners to make sure we understand where their gaps are going to be based on their extended responses that they've experienced over the last 15 or so months. Again, we did release some guidance again for this upcoming hurricane season to help state and locals prepare in a COVID-19 environment. And it does address a lot of the lessons learned from last year and best practices so they can better prepare their responses and do their planning with the COVID-19 implications in mind.
Thank you so much. I have another question. I think it's best here for FEMA. This one comes from Elliot Weld with the Florida Keys Free Press. And the question is, with the Keys still recovering from the effects of Hurricane Irma in 2017, are emergency preparedness measures being looked at differently in island settings such as ours, given that we have especially little protection from storm surge? And if so, what extra protections can be given to island settings like ours?
I think that the best way to address that, right, is we're seeing more storms, we're seeing more intense storms, and we really need to have a focus on how do we reduce the impacts from those storms, whether it's the islands and the Keys or other areas that have been prone to disasters across this country. And so investing in that system-wide mitigation is going to make a big difference to help reduce the impacts from the storms, because we're certainly not going to be able to stop the storms themselves. And so that's, again, FEMA has released new programs like the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities grant program that provides mitigation funding for communities to help build those mitigation measures and reduce that risk for future threats.
Thank you. And I think this next one may be for FEMA. We're going to go to the phone here to Daryl Holly. Daryl, your line should now be open.
Hello there. Yeah, Ms. Griswold made it a point to urge people living inland to remain aware of hurricane threats. What is the cumulative domestic population figure that FEMA is now using in discussion of totals within the risk zone for the Atlantic hurricane season?
So I'm off you. Yeah, so it's important, right, that we look at the inland threats from hurricanes as well as the coastal threats. And state and local jurisdictions are taking all of those factors into play. As you've heard Matt say that, you know, climate change is increasing the amount of rainfall that we're seeing from these events. And that rainfall is going to have a tremendous impact on our communities that may not have thought they were vulnerable to hurricanes. As far as the specific numbers, I don't have those in front of me, but I know as we are reaching out and doing more equitable approaches to delivering our services, especially through COVID-19, we're using a lot of the data that's out there, the SVI, Socially Vulnerable Index data, to help us better understand the communities that might have needs the most, and so we can better prepare our responses to meet the needs of the communities.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Daniela Medina. Daniela, your line should now be open.
Hi, this is Daniela Medina with the USA Today Network. I have a two-part question for Matt. We know that Louisiana had a really devastating hurricane season last year with Laura and Delta. And then with recent flooding now, what kind of impacts can Louisiana expect? And if you could also touch on the South in general.
Sure. Yeah, last year was an absolutely devastating year for many parts of southern Louisiana. The ongoing flooding now. The ongoing flooding now wouldn't have a direct link to anything as far as controlling the number of hurricanes or tropical storms. But it does highlight the need to kind of be prepared, start preparing now for what could come, because it could be more flooding should a storm come into your area. Again, specific tracks and specific numbers of storms that will impact a specific, very specific region. That's really best forecast by the National Hurricane Center forecasters a week out. So take the time, but it's the message today is take a time to prepare now. If you're a coastal area, understand that you could be flooded by storm surge and high winds. And if you're inland, the heavy rain threat, especially in low-lying and very flat areas, that freshwater flooding threat it's very real and very hazardous.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I think our next question will probably come to you as well, but our question is about drones. How are they used when they're deployed, and how do they improve real-time forecasting? From Janessa Duncombe.
So underwater or even aerial drones, they're able to take measurements of the atmosphere and in the ocean in places that maybe we don't already have equipment deployed to, or they may be very risky for humans to go into. But anytime, it all comes back to anytime we can have a better, more up-to-date, more accurate measurement of the atmosphere and the ocean around the storm, then that can be fed into not only our computer models, but also be analyzed by the Hurricane Center staff. Then that can result in a better prediction of where that storm could go and the intensity of that storm.
Thank you so much. Going to the phone here, our next question is from Marcy Schatzman. Marcy, your line should now be open.
We have a barrier island here in Boca Raton, Florida, and a lot of people keep a very close eye on warnings and watches because evacuations are predicted. Is there anything new in predicting storms and timeframes for warnings and watches leading to evacuations?
Matt, that's probably a little bit beyond your scope, right? Because that's really a question for the work of the National Hurricane Center. But Marcy, you know what, why don't I follow up with you, or you reach out to me, and I'll make sure that you get in touch with our colleagues there who can speak specifically about their watch and warning process with you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely, you're welcome. Our next question is a follow-up from Kimberly Miller. How does the positive phase of the AMO affect hurricane season, and what features of the AMO contribute to higher storm numbers and increased intensity?
So the AMO, it kind of sets the background stage for the sea surface temperature pattern, which is related to the wind patterns above it. Typically during the high activity eras, we see warmer than normal sea surface temperatures, reduced vertical wind shear in the Atlantic, weaker than normal trade winds, and an enhanced West African monsoon. All of those factors combine to increasing the both frequency and potentially the intensity of this over the season of tropical storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes for the Atlantic Basin.
Thanks, Matt. One more here probably for you as well. Let's see, this question is from Chris Van Mosner. He's wondering if you're able to provide any color on the number of storms that are expected to enter the U.S. Gulf, or what the models say about the favorability of the formation of major storms in the Gulf.
So overall, during a high activity era or in above normal season, you would expect some slightly more activity into the Gulf of Mexico, as well as closer to the U.S. There are more landfalls in the U.S. There's almost twice as many landfalls during an active year from major hurricanes as there are during inactive years. There's 40% more storms during an active year in general than an inactive year. But as far as specific forecasts of where in the basin, the Atlantic Basin, that storms will form, that's still an ongoing area of research for NOAA.
Thanks, Matt. We are winding down here. We have time for just a couple more questions. So I'll read a few others from the chat here. One comes from Michael Williams with Weatherboy. What is NOAA doing to improve the infrastructure that supports communications and the public and the media during upcoming hurricane seasons? He references here NWS chat, and obviously that's sort of an internal function with partners, but will these systems be upgraded or enhanced? Matt, I'm not sure if you have any expertise in that area. Otherwise, Michael, if you're listening, be happy to follow up with you and connect you with our colleagues at the National Hurricane Center. Ben.
Yeah, I can just briefly respond to that and say that we are actively working on improving our dissemination system and our communication systems. We have a plan in place that's been delivered to Congress, and we're working closely with them on that. And that's been a big point for us recently. So I think you're going to see significant improvements soon.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Next question comes for Matt from WRDE in Milton, Delaware. Are there any indications that there'll be more, quote, homegrown storms this year, or more storms that form well out to sea? I know last year we had many storms form in the Caribbean and Gulf with many impacts to land.
No, there's no indication that this year will be any closer to the U.S. coast or out to sea. So therefore, you have to be prepared for a lot of formations near the coast, or potentially not so many. So that's really not predictable at these timescales, months in advance. So take the time to prepare now, as if we could have a lot of formations close to the coast. That's the real takeaway.
Thank you so much. We're going to take one last question here, and I see one from Andrea Leinfelder. Andrea, your line is now open.
Hi, this question's for FEMA. I was hoping to get some more specifics on, what you learned about, using touchless devices and virtual stuff during last year's hurricane season that can be used when even, more people are getting vaccinated. So just like very specific things that you guys put in place that you plan to carry over. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. As far as specifics, I don't have any specifics right here with me today, and we can certainly get back to you on some of the things that we have learned. I know that we have included some of those best practices and lessons learned in the guidance that we are distributing, or that we released earlier this week. But I would also say that I think there's a lot of things that we learned through the COVID-19 response about doing things more virtually and remotely that are going to help improve the way we deliver our programs and services in the future. And so there's still a lot for us to kind of unravel from what we learned last year as we start to figure out how it could actually be institutionalized into the way FEMA delivers its programs.
Thank you so much. Alrighty. Well, let's see here. I'll turn my camera back on so I can thank everybody in person for being on with us today. Again, I just want to say thank you to our speakers, Deputy Secretary Graves, Acting NOAA Administrator Ben Friedman, Matt Rosenkrantz from our Climate Prediction Center at the National Weather Service, and FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell, again, for their time and for participating in today's briefing. A recording of today's briefing will be made available online at the bottom of our press release on NOAA.gov later today. And finally, if you have any questions, please contact me, Lauren Gacious, at 202-740-8314. Again, 202-740-8314. That concludes today's webinar. I thank you so much for joining us.